It is now my honor to welcome to the podium our member, Steve Boyer, to introduce our main program. Steve.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jim Walker.
Well, can you all hear me? It's certainly a great pleasure to be here in front of the largest Rotary club in the world and the fourth to be created. And I know how important these lunches are because when over the last 10 years I have been developing projects in Turkey with a very good partner in Ankara, Turkey. And no matter what sort of cardiac arrest our development projects were in, he said, "This can wait. I have to go to the Rotary lunch." So I know this is a very important event, and I certainly appreciate the time. Also, just a couple of things before I get into some of the slides and some of the message about them. In addition to having a happy tax day, I was reading from the BBC that this in the United Kingdom is Eco-Deficit Day. This is the day at which the United Kingdom economy goes into sort of the non-sustainable mode. From this time down to the rest of the year, they are living essentially beyond their renewal of water and other ecosystems. Because if the world all had the same standard of living as the United Kingdom, we'd need 5 Earths to sustain it. So hopefully, but I do have a message of hope, not of fear, not of concern, because I think after 30 years of hard work, we have an overnight success that's just coming into the forefront. You saw it behind as a backdrop at all the political conventions, and so I want to give you some of the things that have developed in the wind energy field. And these will be on the website, so if you can't see it from back in the corner there, the information will be there. Wind is no longer a boutique part of the power industry. At this point, it's still only 1 or 1.5% of the total energy generation in our electric sector. But on the future growth, in 2007, it was 35% of the capacity added in the United States, and in 2008, it was 42%. And basically, the only kind of power plants that are really being built today are natural gas and wind. So it has arrived in the mainstream. The investment growth has been incredible. In 2004, the projects that were built in the United States amounted to about $700 million worth of investment when all the financings were closed. And in 2008, there was over 17 billion and nearly 50 billion worldwide. And that's not some sort of a bubble-type growth. That's basically, wind projects is a very specialized form of real estate development. It's a commercial real estate development project where the anchor tenant is not Nordstrom's or Walmart, but it's a power contract with Puget Sound or Seattle Light and so forth. So it's very important to realize that these are part of our infrastructure. So that investment is not some sort of stock value. That's the value of steel in the ground. And the U.S. surpassed Germany as a world leader in new installations, total output, and annual output as well. They're still way ahead of us in terms of share of their electricity. They're up at 10 or 15% of the electricity is now coming from wind. And remarkably, in 2008 alone, 35,000 jobs were added in the wind sector. There's now totaling 85,000 jobs. I checked on the web last night. The coal mining industry is 83,000 jobs. The petroleum industry is 101,000 jobs. So in terms of a job creator, this is a pretty significant engine of change. And if you want to look at a map of hope, these are manufacturing facilities in green that existed for wind in the United States as of 2007, and the orange and yellow dots are new facilities expanded or announced expansions in 2008. 2007 and 2008. There's really no other part of our manufacturing sector that is expanding at this rapid rate. Many of these so-called green-collar jobs are just good old-fashioned blue-collar jobs. A windmill is 90% steel and gears and in towers and so forth. And the plant, the people inside the Beltway that made this chart don't know where Ephrata, Washington is, but that's Katana Industries there that builds towers for our Goodnow and other projects. But this is a very encouraging message when I give talks in Detroit, and a lot of people there that really if they just had the orders, they know how to make world-class machines and bend steel and stuff like that. They don't need to be retrained. They just need to get the order. Washington has become a very significant player. It's the 5th largest state in terms of installed wind capacity. 1,375 megawatts is about $2.5 billion worth of investment. If it were a country, it'd be the 13th largest wind country, just behind Japan, and gaining on Japan rapidly. And you see, from 30 years ago, when the only wind projects in the United States were in California, and I remember sponsoring the first International Wind Conference in 1981, and we had 3 windmills outside of Palm Springs, and the Thursday before the convention, the Alcoa wind turbine, according to their press release, catastrophically disassembled itself on TV. The whole thing just flew apart. So we lost a third of our national capacity right there in one evening. But now you see the investment is spread all over the country. However, we're not immune from the economic downturn. You know, we need functioning capital markets. This is capital intensive. You don't raise $17 billion without having functioning capital markets. It's been supported since 1992 by a federal tax credit of about 2 cents a kilowatt hour, which just about levels the playing field between wind and other technologies that wind, which produces no air emissions or greenhouse gas emissions and uses no water, and you have to compete with other technologies that have had perpetual subsidies and don't have to really fully pay for the garbage disposal. Utilities have been hit by the slowdown in demand, but the Obama stimulus bill was really marvelous in its targeting. As soon as that was passed, I was, in fact, interviewed on National Public Radio this morning. I said, when did you know that this bill would be important? I said, as soon as I finished reading it, because they had basically listened to the people in industry and the community and said, what do we need to go forward? We need more transmission. We need to make the capital markets work. We need to have job training, and we need to have R&D in the technology. And so that's a very, very hopeful message as well. So I think we'll see a decline from 2008, but as soon as we get back to 2009 and 10, the market will be growing. When you talk about the capital markets, this is the incredible shrinking capital markets. The investors in wind in 2007, there were about 22 of them, but they included some now household names like Lehman Brothers and AIG. And so now there are only 4. You know, but we have to redo that. And we're hoping that the Congress will make it possible for many more people to invest in wind. Just as in Germany, there are 200,000 professionals, lawyers, doctors, teachers, and so forth that have invested in wind projects. And so that there are enough dentists so that if the German Congress ever tries to change the law, they all get root canals scheduled the next week, all the members of Parliament. So anyway, when you look at where the wind industry is going to go from here, that the blue bar on the right is the 8,300 megawatts, the $17 billion that was steel in the ground in 2008. There'll probably be a dip down, but then it's going to go up to, 8,000, 10,000, maybe even 15,000 megawatts a year, which is a very significant addition. That is no longer a trivial boutique type of resource. And it's remarkably affordable. There's a huge resource in the United States that I'll talk about later that's all available about 8 cents a kilowatt hour. Very broad resource that's affordable. This was studied in a landmark study, even done under the Bush administration, in spite of the reputation that they had of not favoring things like global warming. President Bush, when he was a governor of Texas and as President of the United States, did more to lay the groundwork for wind that now Obama has taken really a leadership position and is moving it very quickly. This was a DOE study done and released in May of 2008. It went through my old alma mater, Office of Management Budget. It took them 10 months to review the study. Within that time, in 9 months, our company built a $400 million wind park in Minnesota. In the same time, it took Office of Management Budget to review this paper study. So anyway, but they got the answers right. What they did was they did a feasibility test. Could we get as much of our electricity from wind as we get from nuclear today, about 20%? And the answer was yes. It's feasible. It can be done. The technology's there. We don't have to wait for Wind 3.0 or 4.0. We can buy a GE turbine or a Siemens turbine or a Clipper turbine, and it'll be perfectly fine. And it has significant economic and job-creating benefits. This is a wonderful map that T. Boone Pickens and I both like to use, and it's by 3-Tier, a company in Seattle, Washington, that is going to get an award this year at our national convention for having developed a product called First Look that over 25,000 prospectors, people that want to get involved in wind, have used to find out how good the wind is at their site. And so it's a wonderful company here, and you can see the red wind streaming across the plains, that old song from Oklahoma. And so that resource in the center of the country could, if wind blew all the time, which is one of the issues that we do deal with, it would more than supply enough electricity for the entire country 8 times over. 8 times over. So it's a huge resource. We really are the Saudi Arabia of wind. If we're going to get 20% of our electricity from wind, we have to go from 25,000 megawatts today, which, just for reference, if you took all of the 31 federal hydro projects in the Northwest together, it's about 25,000 megawatts. So that's sort of an order of magnitude. That's where it is today. You have to get 12 times that to 300,000 megawatts. So we still got a steep hill ahead of us. This is not a sprint, this is a marathon. But if we do that, what do we get? Well, we can build between now and 2020 the equivalent of 50 large nuclear plants. And my friends in the nuclear industry, and my parent company is the world's largest nuclear company, Electricité de France. So we're definitely not anti-nuclear. And the people that are developing carbon sequestration for coal plants, McKinsey study says the first time they'll have a really commercial scale carbon sequestration coal plant, if it works, is 2020. In that time, wind can build economically the equivalent of 50 new nuclear plants, 125,000 megawatts of wind. And as you see, the red bars are where we've been in the last 3 years and where I think we'll be this year. The blue bars are where we would have to be in terms of annual installations in order to meet that 20% target of getting as much of our electricity from wind as we do from nuclear today. Where would Washington be at the end of this thing? Washington would be still a very major player, one of the top 5 or 10. It'd probably have $10 billion investment, 5,000 plus megawatts of wind projects in the state. This is just a scenario. It could be more, it could be less, but it certainly has the resources, the transmission, and other things that will make it possible. Where would the jobs go? This industry will be $1 trillion investment over the next 20 years. It should create about 500,000 jobs. Some of them will be manufacturing, other ones will be in construction and operations. Some of those jobs will go into places where there isn't much wind, down in the southeast, which the utilities are complaining about wind because they don't have much. It'll go into some of the Rust Belt areas in Michigan, where Detroit is suffering from the recession more than anywhere else. It can go a lot where the state wants it to go. If a state has an initiative to really bring jobs into the state, like Iowa has over the past 5 years, you can move this needle much more than this shows on this map, which is a national model output. Wind is always part of our portfolio. It's not a whole answer, but now it's 1.5%. If you had a mix of portfolio, you'd want to bring this stock up to about 20% or more, because of the non-polluting, non-water using thing. If it does that, it displaces quite a bit of natural gas, which means natural gas is cheaper for everybody else. That alone saves about $100 billion a year, which is enough to pay for any increase in costs there. It can also involve a lot of avoided coal plants. I don't know where the time is right now, but so somebody will bring the hook, I guess. But if you look at, can this make a difference in things like global warming? And the answer is yes. In fact, it's probably the best offensive weapon we have in the fight against climate change and global warming, because it can be deployed at scale. The best analogy is probably World War II, when we converted our automobile industry to making bombers. And FDR, after Pearl Harbor, got on the radio. Obama would now do it on YouTube. But Roosevelt, when he got on, he said, "We can turn our automobile industry and we can make 60,000 airplanes in the next 3 years." And the typical politician, he was wrong. We made 233,000 airplanes in the next 3 years. But it took 38% of our GNP and 87% of our federal budget. Now we can do it without even beating an eye. To build 300,000 megawatts of wind, it would take about 4% of General Motors' production capacity, which is spare at the moment. So we can do it. We can do it. What this does for the climate is displace 800 million plus tons of CO2 a year, which I have no idea what that means. So I put it in terms of, that's the equivalent of taking 3/4 of the automobiles in the United States off the road, 140 million out of 207 million. It's equivalent to displacing the entire output of the U.S. industrial sector in 2006. Can you imagine how strong this position will be to go into to negotiate with the Chinese? Because the United States and the Chinese together make up half of the greenhouse gas emissions. You go to them and says, listen, we've just taken off the charts all of our industrial sector, or 3/4 of our cars. So we're a very strong position. Power plants are the largest users of water in the United States, more than agriculture. And this could reduce that water use by 17%, which allows you to use it for other things, perhaps like biofuels, biomass, and other things like that. We do need to build up our infrastructure. Washington State is gifted with a very good transmission system, largely because of the investment made before World War II and for the aluminum plants and all the hydro system. The rest of the country is not so lucky. And if there's a satellite photograph from August 13, 2002, when you see a big chunk out of the Northeast where there are no lights on in Ontario and Ohio and those areas, because the grid was so weak that a transformer problem caused the grid to fail. We need to build the equivalent of Eisenhower's interstate highway system, a green power superhighway. It can be done at a cost of about $60 billion, which I think is about a third of an AIG these days. So it's, not that expensive, but it can be put into the budgets of the utilities, and we can absorb a lot more renewable and variable energy if the utilities are given time and the support to work it in their system. The American Wind Energy Association took this game plan from that 20% wind report and put it into a legislative program. And we didn't know who was going to get elected president, but we wanted to be ready when that call came at 11:30 one night and somebody said, the president's going to give a 12-point program on energy tomorrow. We need 6 points from you. What are they? We wanted to know what to ask for. So we asked for something that would help get over the problem with the capital markets, a quick fix on the federal tax credits. We wanted a longer-term extension for these tax credits because we've been getting them 1 year at a time. And so we'd have an industry that would be a $2 billion industry one year, a $500 million year industry the next year, up and down, up and down. It's like you want to see a federal policy that works. You could turn it on, it quadruples, you turn it off, it gets cut by a fourth. And we got a 3-year tax extension. For now, the energy committees in the Senate and the House are considering a long-term energy measure, which would be a renewable portfolio standard, requiring all the utilities in the country above a certain size to get 25% of their electricity from renewables by 2025. That would give a huge signal to the world, to the manufacturers in the world and people, both foreign and domestic like GE, to say, listen, this is a permanent good market. We're not only the world's biggest the last 3 years, we're going to be the world's biggest permanently. And also to build the transmission up. And then there's going to be some form of carbon regulation. The price is going to be put on carbon. We're not sure exactly how. And Obama, in the first 40 days, gets us 40% of the way through that list. So it's pretty amazing. I put quotes around when I say done because there's a lot of details in the regulations and the implementation of these acts. But in the stimulus bill alone, I counted over $100 billion of incentives for efficiency, solar and wind, that I think are going to be very cost-effective, create a lot of jobs, whether it's inner city or out in the rural areas. In Washington, you've been a leader. Both the body politic spoke in 2006. It voted I-937. It sets a target for renewable energy, 15% by 2020. That's been very valuable in bringing companies like ours to invest. I think with a second project, we should be well over $500 million invested in the state of Washington. So that's very positive. And wind is the only technology you can go out and you can order from General Electric, a household name, or from Siemens, or other companies, a very competitive wind power plant that they can deliver on a truck to you. A couple of big trucks. You have to put them someplace. But still, there's no other technology that's ready to do that and be able to generate power for 8-9 cents a kilowatt hour. There are a lot of wind farms being developed in Washington. This is just a list of some of them, but over about $6 billion worth. We do need more transmission, especially east of McNary. A lot of the easier sites are getting developed now. It's going to be tougher and tougher. That's the developer's job, to find a pathway through these many twists and turns. I always say as a developer, if a project hasn't seemed to die 12 times, you're not taking enough risk. And the way to get through things, concerns about wildlife and safety and these things, is to take them seriously, address them face up. One of the things we've done in the wind industry, which is unique, we've created a research institute. And this is the exactly not your tobacco institute. We created the American Wind Wildlife Institute. The board is completely balanced between 5 industry representatives and 5 environmental group representatives. Imagine how hard it was to work to earn the trust of the National Audubon Society, the Union of Concerned Scientists, the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and so forth. They trusted us that this was going to be honest research done because we can face up to our limitations. One project that was mentioned before that is been going through the permit process for a while is out in Ellensburg. I visited the site. It's a wonderful area for a wind park. and it's been refined over the last 5 or 6 years, so it's a very interesting project. But just an example of what some of the economic benefits of a specific project, because we had to go through some studies of this. It creates a lot of new jobs during the construction period, but ongoing operations it does as well. And some of the most important things is the steady revenue it develops for the local infrastructure and schools, so that over $1 million is going into education every year, and the wind keeps blowing for a long time, so this is like a permanent boost to that part. And you remember Obama, this is a very hard act to follow with these nurses and pioneering here, and Obama has talked about health, education, and clean energy. And so they all really come together. And so we're going to be healthier with less pollution, we're going to have more money for education, and we're going to have more clean energy. It's taken like almost 10 years to get this far. It takes you, once you start building a project, it takes almost no time at all. But to get through all the hurdles, it takes a long time, and it requires support at every level, from the President of the United States right down to local city council members and so forth. So it's a pleasure to be part of that. So my conclusion is wind is a big part of the solution. This is the first no-carbon domestic supply option that we can really deploy at scale. No emissions, no water use, reduces our gas and other dependence. We do need to do a lot of things together, but I'm really excited that we're just at the start of the renewable energy century, and it's fun to be part of it. Thank you very much. Yes, absolutely.
We have time for a few questions, so our mic handlers are getting the mics. Dave's out there.
Thank you. It was hard for me to realize how big these things are until I saw how big a truck it takes to move just one blade down the highway. And so I'm curious, how much wind speed does it take to get these turbines to turn around, and then how much electricity is being generated by revolution, if that's a relevant question?
Well, I was amazed because in 1962, I graduated from high school and got an old Chevy, and with two of my friends drove out to see the Space Needle at the Seattle World's Fair from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And at that time, I didn't know about windmills. Now, a typical windmill, the tower is about 100 meters tall, which is about half the size of the Space Needle. The blades operate by the principle of aerodynamic lift, so you get like 50 times more energy out of them than if you just were sticking your hand out of a car moving along. It takes about an 8.5 or 9 mile an hour wind, about 4 meters a second before they start turning on, and they don't develop their peak power until maybe about 25 miles an hour. So you need to put them in really windy places, because the energy produced is the cube of the wind speed. Speed times speed times speed. So that's why the prospectors look at very windy places that still have acceptable land use, wildlife, and other impacts.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. What is the return on capital on that $17 billion invested?
I'd say most of the companies are looking for returns on capital after-tax equity returns of about between 9 and 14%.
I noticed that one of the high opportunity area regions had a complete absence of existing wind and capacity, and I assume that's because of transmission cost. What's the ratio of generation cost in an area like Kansas or Nebraska to the transmission cost to get it to where the electricity would be used?
You probably figure that the transmission and the interconnection costs are going to be maybe 5 or 10% of the delivered cost at the end user. It's not as significant as you would think.
And a follow on to Skip's question, there used to be small-scale windmills all over farms everywhere in America, and still are in Mexico. Is there a place for small-scale distributed wind generation that doesn't require this power transmission infrastructure?
Absolutely, but in fact there's a whole area we call small wind. It's like the kind of things you could put up at your house or your farm, and fortunately the Congress last year did pass a small wind tax credit. There had not been one, so now you can have that. There's also another movement called community wind, where local communities are getting together and combining their land and maybe even use municipal financing for that. And you're right, we lost our lead in modern windmills to the Danes and the Germans in the 1980s when gas prices went down. In 1914, the United States had the 90% of the world's market for those water pumping windmills. We had one guy, Mr. Perry, who had sold 800,000 of them, we dominated the world, and then we lost it. So this is the second time we've lost our lead, and we don't intend to lose it again, I think.
T. Boone Pickens, the oil and gas man, has been proposing this use of the wind alley as you showed on the map. Is he working with you? Is he working against you? What's his proposal versus yours?
He's working. We're working with him quite closely. He conceived of the idea that you can use wind to displace natural gas in the power sector, and then use natural gas in 18-wheelers and other transportation. That's not our part of it, but I will tell you, he's made a couple of important connections for us. First of all, he spent $70 million of his own money on media, and he got the word out. We could never have done that. And also, he made the connection between national defense, energy independence, and the transportation sector. And I was privileged to be at a conference at Microsoft about a few months ago where we addressed those issues. So wind can make a contribution not just to electricity, but also in transport as well.
This looks like a great investment story. What companies are going to be leaders in the wind area in the next 10 years? Well,
I'm sure I would get in a lot of trouble if I started staking stock picks. But I think there are from some of our members. But I mentioned some names. GE, the big Danish company, Vestas, are major turbine suppliers. There are not as many pure developers as you would think to invest in. And that's why we hope to make it possible for people to invest in things like in REITs, real estate investment trusts, and partnerships that haven't been allowed under the current tax laws.
This is a follow-up question to someone stated before. We're impressed with the technology that you've developed in this, but I have a quick question. These are so huge, you must have come up with some plan or method to keep our bird friends out of the propellers.
Yes, the best thing to do. In fact, I spent 2 years negotiating a settlement of a long-standing lawsuit with the Audubon in the one area of California outside of Livermore where we shouldn't have put 5,000 windmills. They were put there in 1984 when nobody knew to check for golden eagles before we did it. The main thing is you prevent putting them there. So you do at least a year of pre-construction studies where you monitor the birds and the bats and other wildlife. And so if they're too serious, you basically don't expect to get a permit there. And that's one of the reasons we created this American Wind Wildlife Institute. We already have raised $3 million in seed money to research those issues better. There are also our radar issues. If you have big turbines like that, a big turbine has the same radar reflection as a 747. And so we have to be very careful working with the Defense Department, Homeland Security, to not have radar reflection be an issue. At this point, the National Audubon says that the bigger concern they have is that global warming threatens 37% of the species of bird with extinction. And there's no evidence that any wind turbine, or even all the wind turbines in the United States, are threatening the population, even the local population of any birds. Bats there's more study of that. That's a new issue. But at this point, we think wind and wildlife can really live together very comfortably.
Your slide showed the federal subsidy to be about 2 cents per kilowatt hour. So that would work out to be about $20 per megawatt hour.
Correct.
Coal or natural gas can produce that megawatt for about $40 an hour. So it looks like the federal subsidy is about 50% of equivalent coal or natural gas. Now, a 1,000 megawatt unit windmill or mills will produce how many megawatts in a year's period of time? I'm interested in what is the annual subsidy for the government for a 1,000 megawatt power unit?
There's the 1,000 megawatt wind farm is about the equivalent of a 400 or 500 megawatt gas or coal plant. And you have to be very careful to have a balanced look at the subsidies. Every energy form is getting a lot of subsidies already. Natural gas, oil have the oil depletion allowance. A lot of other things. Nuclear has the Price-Anderson Act, which insures against catastrophic accidents, and coal has a lot of subsidies. And the coal you're talking about is old coal that doesn't have carbon sequestration, which is probably going to add at least 30% to the cost of coal. Wind cannot compete with old coal. There's no question about that. It's depending on whether gas prices are at $12 or at $4, natural gas is either a little bit more or a little bit less competitive than wind. We think that the great partnership at the moment, for me, the simple strategy, if I were the emperor of energy, would say, do all the energy efficiency you can do, because green energy is a terrible thing to waste, build enough gas plants to balance the wind plants, and then for the next 10 years build an awful lot of wind, and that'll provide you the time to bring nuclear, carbon sequester, coal, and other technologies like solar down in cost.
So that 1,000 megawatt plant will produce, equivalent 400 megawatts, say gas plant.
Yeah.
Now, what will that 400 megawatt gas plant produce in megawatt hours over a 12-month period?
Well, I'm saying the same thing. I'm not sure I can take the time to do the calculation, but it's in most of the part of the Midwest, the actual, some places in the Midwest you can get, gas for 4 or 5 cents a kilowatt hour, and there the 2 cents is about that, maybe 30-40% of the subsidy. But we think that if you're a utility customer, basically wind is going to be a very stable part of your electric bill. I can tell you what the price of wind is going to be in 2030 from a plant. I can't tell you what the price of natural gas is going to be in 2030. It helps you from that volatility. It's all part of a portfolio. It should be more than 1%. I think in the range of 15 to 30% is where wind is going to end up as over the next 20 years. Thank you.
Jim has volunteered to stick around a little bit after the meeting to answer some of those highly technical questions. Thanks to all the participants in today's program. Lois, thank you for you and to your nurses for the dedication that you have shown. Congratulations on your 60th anniversary. We're very proud. Jim, thank you for sharing your innovations and harnessing our resources to produce energy. Next week, April 22nd, we are at the Westin Hotel, and we will be honoring the graduates of the Seattle Public Schools who have distinguished themselves by overcoming incredible challenges. And in the spite of all of those challenges, they will graduate meeting all requirements from high school. They are truly winners for life. Their stories are inspirational, their determination truly commendable. A special receptions for these winners, their guests, and for their Rotarian hosts will begin at 11 until noon in the Vashon Room, the 3rd floor of the Westin. Patrick D'Amelio will be chairing this program and share the long history of this program with our youth schools and early education committee. We will be inspired by the words of Justice Richard Jones as he addresses these incredible young people. For a country that was founded in opposition to taxation, we've sure come a long way. The IRS is the most maligned of all agencies, and they didn't even make up the rules. How appropriate that tax day falls exactly in the middle of a month that began with April's Fool's Day and will end with the shouts, May Day, May Day. We will see you next week when we honor our special guests.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible in part by a grant from First Choice Health, working with the Washington Health Information Collaborative to use technology to bring better health care to patients throughout the Pacific Northwest. First Choice Health.